then putting out the hypothesis that some of this was AI generated.
Indeed, because how can we know that it's not?
I don't think she fully understood or was even interested in what the role was supposed to become. You know, most people would just be like, oh, you have to kind of have skin in the game. Open schools in Wales on a rainy day for a number of years before you...
Have you ever wondered how Meghan Markle really felt when investigators started poking holes in the story of Archie's birth? Because insiders say that behind palace walls, her reaction was nothing short of explosive. For years, she's fought to control every detail of her image, from the romantic royal wedding to the perfectly curated family portraits. But this was different. A fresh investigation has pulled back the curtain on details she never expected the world to see, and sources close to the Sussexes claim Meghan's fury reached a level even her most loyal advisors hadn't witnessed before.
Looks like a human pregnant bum. Alexandra Marshall, what do you make of this video?
I mean, the idea that, you know, she hadn't earned enough brownie points.
Some say she was pacing the halls, demanding answers, and planning an all-out counterattack before the headlines could spiral. And while the public was digesting the revelations, Meghan was already crafting her next move. Because when your entire legacy rests on a carefully protected narrative, the last thing you can afford is for that narrative to crumble, especially in front of millions. If you could have been a fly on the wall the moment Meghan heard about the investigation's findings, you'd have seen a woman who prides herself on control suddenly blindsided. Meghan is not the type to shrink away quietly when her private life is under the microscope, especially when the stakes involve her children and her reputation. According to those who've worked closely with her, she likely felt a surge of anger mixed with panic. In her eyes, this wasn't just another tabloid hit piece. It was a direct threat to the story she had spent years telling. A story of love, modern royalty, and a break from outdated tradition. Imagine her phone lighting up with messages from her PR team, each one more urgent than the last. Her lawyers were probably already drafting statements. Advisors were combing through every public record and every photograph, looking for gaps to patch before the press could seize on them. Those close to her say Meghan has always believed in controlling her own narrative, down to the smallest detail. So to see investigators unearthing conflicting timelines, missing signatures, and strange edits to Archie's birth certificate, it wasn't just insulting, it was infuriating. She would have seen it as an attack not just on her privacy, but on her credibility as a mother. And for someone who spent years fighting to be heard and respected, nothing could have been more personal than that. Yet even in the middle of her outrage, Meghan was likely already plotting her next move. Because if there's one thing she's proven time and again, it's that she doesn't back down from a fight. But to understand why this investigation has caused such a firestorm, you have to look back at the birth itself. A moment that should have been joyous but instead became one of the most scrutinized events in modern royal history. From the very start, nothing about Archie's arrival followed the time-honored playbook. Tradition dictates that when a royal baby is born, the palace issues a prompt statement, the public is updated at every stage, and a beaming couple eventually steps out onto the hospital steps, introducing their child to the world. But with Meghan and Harry, every step felt delayed, controlled, and carefully staged. The first sign something was off came when the palace announced Meghan was in labor, hours after Archie had actually been born. That small discrepancy, just a few hours, seemed innocuous to some, but for others it was the first crack in a story that would never quite make sense. Then there were the conflicting birth times. Some outlets reported Archie was born at 5:26 a.m., others at 2:26 a.m. This wasn't a minor clerical error. It was a glaring inconsistency in what was supposed to be one of the most celebrated moments in recent royal memory. Palace's failure to clarify these details quickly only fed the growing suspicion that something was being deliberately concealed. And in the absence of facts, speculation thrives. Suddenly, every odd moment, every delayed announcement, and every missing detail became a piece of a puzzle people were desperate to solve. Didn't help that Meghan and Harry seemed determined to keep the birth shrouded in secrecy. Instead of appearing on the hospital steps like William and Kate had done, they opted for a private photo session inside Windsor Castle 2 days later. In that carefully controlled setting, Meghan and Harry presented Archie to the world. But instead of looking like overwhelmed, joyful new parents, they looked rehearsed, even slightly tense. The lighting was perfect. Their clothes were immaculate. But something about the moment felt hollow. Where was the warmth? The rawness, the messy authenticity that makes those early days of parenthood so relatable? For many watching, it felt like a performance rather than a celebration. And then came the infamous Getty photo, the image that would ignite some of the wildest theories to ever swirl around the royal family. In that picture, Meghan's baby bump appeared to shift unnaturally, almost like a pillow caught mid-slide. Getty defended the photo's authenticity, insisting it hadn't been manipulated. But Meghan and Harry's refusal to comment on it only made things worse. Was it a trick of the camera, a wardrobe mishap, or something more deliberate? Their silence handed the narrative to conspiracy theorists on a silver platter. As the rumors began to spiral, many wondered why Meghan didn't just come out and address them head-on. A single statement, a candid photo, or a verified medical document could have put the speculation to rest. But instead, the Sussexes doubled down on their policy of limited access and carefully curated information. And with every non-answer, the suspicion grew. When people feel like they're being kept in the dark, they start drawing their own conclusions. And those conclusions often stick harder than any official explanation ever could. You think it couldn't get any murkier, think again. Because when Archie's birth certificate was finally released to the public, it sparked an entirely new wave of questions. For one, it appeared unusually late. But more troubling was what was missing. No attending physician's signature. For a royal birth, that was unheard of. Every royal baby before Archie had a certificate signed by the medical team, a standard formality that offered a measure of transparency. But in this case, there was nothing. Then, weeks later, Meghan's full legal name, Rachel Meghan Markle, was quietly erased from the certificate and replaced with her official title, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Harry's name was altered too. Palace issued a half-hearted statement blaming the change on administrative procedures, while Meghan's camp insisted she had no involvement. But for many, the excuses felt flimsy. Why tamper with a legal document unless you were trying to send a message or hide something? In Meghan's mind, this was likely the ultimate insult. She had spent her entire adult life building a brand around transparency and empowerment. Yet here she was, accused of playing games with the most intimate details of her child's life. And rather than confront the controversy directly, she was forced to watch as the world picked apart her story, piece by piece. Even her defenders were left struggling to explain the inconsistencies. Some blamed outdated palace protocols. Others insisted it was simply a case of wanting privacy in an era of relentless media intrusion. But no matter how you spun it, the facts didn't align. While all this was unfolding, Meghan was likely at her most defensive. She has never tolerated feeling out of control. Friends say that when she feels cornered, her instinct is to fight back, to reclaim the narrative by any means necessary. And behind the scenes, that's exactly what she was doing. Her advisors were briefing lawyers. Her PR team was plotting counter-messaging. But no matter how many statements were drafted or how many talking points were rehearsed, the damage was already done. The perception had hardened. Something about Archie's birth just didn't add up. When Meghan and Harry finally sat down with Oprah for their bombshell interview, the world expected clarity. Instead, they got more questions. Meghan claimed Archie had been denied a royal title because of concerns about his race, a revelation that instantly made global headlines. But royal historians quickly pointed out that under the rules established by King George V, Archie wasn't automatically entitled to be called a prince. William's children only received their titles early because the Queen herself intervened. Meghan and Harry could have requested the same, but they didn't. And they didn't correct the record during the interview either. For critics, it was yet another example of selective storytelling designed to stir outrage rather than offer the whole truth. Over time, the inconsistencies piled up. Dates didn't align. Statements contradicted earlier interviews. And rather than confront the confusion, the Sussexes leaned into an emotional narrative about being victimized by the press and the palace. That strategy won them sympathy in some circles, but it also deepened the distrust. Because even supporters had to admit that the facts around Archie's birth were, at best, opaque. Meanwhile, Meghan's reaction to the ongoing investigation grew increasingly combative. According to sources close to her team, she viewed the scrutiny not as a legitimate inquiry but as a personal attack designed to humiliate her. She felt the public had no right to question her choices as a mother. But in the royal sphere, tradition isn't just window dressing. It's the glue that binds the institution to the people. And when you defy that tradition without offering a clear alternative, you leave a vacuum. In that vacuum, suspicion thrives. And so, the speculation took on a life of its own. Was Meghan truly pregnant? Did she use a surrogate? Why didn't any trusted medical professionals step forward to vouch for the birth? Why were there no candid photos of her entering or exiting the hospital? Why were the birth times conflicting? And why edit the certificate after the fact? For every question, there was only silence or vague deflection, and that silence felt louder than any denial. The most damaging part of all wasn't the rumors themselves. It was Meghan and Harry's refusal to shut them down decisively. A single, verifiable record could have ended the speculation overnight, but instead they let it fester. And once people feel they've been deceived, it's almost impossible to win back their trust. Years later, the fallout from Archie's birth still haunts the Sussexes' reputation. Every time they release a new documentary or give another interview, the same questions resurface. And each time, the answers feel more scripted, less believable. It's as if the truth, whatever it may be, has become less important than the performance. And that's the tragedy of it all. Because behind the headlines and the rumors and the legal threats is a little boy who didn't ask to be born into a circus of speculation. A child who deserves the same love and protection as any other. Yet because of choices made by the adults around him, Archie's arrival has become a case study in how not to manage a royal event. In the end, this was never just about a birth certificate or a photo op. It was about trust, about the belief that even in an age of celebrity culture, some moments should be honest and unvarnished. And when that trust is broken, no amount of PR spin can fully repair it. So will the truth about Archie's birth ever be accepted by the public? Or has the damage become permanent? That's a question only time will answer. But one thing is certain. Meghan's furious reaction to this investigation wasn't just about protecting her privacy. It was about protecting the story she built, piece by carefully curated piece. And as more details continue to emerge, the world is left to decide what, if anything, they still believe. But here's what so many people don't realize. Meghan's furious reaction to the investigation wasn't just about the embarrassment of having inconsistencies exposed. It was about something deeper, something far more personal. To Meghan, every headline questioning her story was also questioning her worth, her legitimacy, and her place in a centuries-old institution that had never quite accepted her. From the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight, she had been treated differently, measured against impossible standards, and picked apart in ways no one else was. So when this investigation cracked open the fragile shell of her carefully constructed narrative, it felt like confirmation that no matter how polished she appeared or how perfectly she performed, there would always be people waiting to tear her down. People close to Meghan have described her as someone who plans every detail meticulously. Whether it's a public appearance or a private moment, she wants to be prepared. She wants to know exactly what people will see, what they will hear, and how they will feel. To some, that level of control comes across as inauthentic, but to Meghan, it's simply self-preservation. After all, she's a woman who's faced relentless judgment from the tabloids, royal watchers, and even members of her own family. She learned early on that if she didn't take control of her story, someone else would, and their version would almost certainly be uglier. But in this case, her instinct to protect and cure it only made the situation worse. The irony is that in trying to protect her privacy, Meghan ended up sacrificing her credibility. Every unanswered question became a blank space people were eager to fill with their own theories. And when you're dealing with a public that has been conditioned to expect transparency from royals, those blank spaces quickly become breeding grounds for scandal. Just look at how swiftly the narrative shifted. One moment, Meghan and Harry were seen as trailblazers, modernizing the monarchy and forging a new path for themselves and their children. The next, they were cast as secretive manipulators with something to hide. The public's fascination with their story didn't disappear. It simply curdled into suspicion. And that suspicion wasn't confined to the tabloids. Even reputable journalists and historians began to raise their eyebrows. Why were there no photos of Meghan arriving at the hospital? Why did no member of the trusted royal medical team come forward to confirm the birth details? Why was the birth certificate edited in such a strange, clumsy way? These were not the kinds of questions that usually surround a royal birth. In decades past, the announcements were clear, the documents were complete, and the photos told a cohesive story. But with Archie, every piece of evidence seemed to contradict the last. Imagine being Meghan in those early days after the investigation broke. Every time she opened her phone, there were new articles dissecting her choices. New headlines screaming about surrogacy, new videos racking up millions of views speculating about everything from her hospital gown to the way she held Archie in those first official photos. It's easy to see why she would feel furious, like the walls were closing in and there was no safe place to stand. But instead of meeting the speculation head-on, Meghan chose to retreat behind a wall of silence and legal threats. And in doing so, she unintentionally confirmed what many were already thinking, that there was more to the story than she wanted anyone to know.